Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 12th of March. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local forecast information for your community and village in Alaska by heading to weather.gov/Alaska. That should work a little bit better in the coming months on your mobile device if you're checking in over a cell network. And of course, on the internet from a computer, it works just fine at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line at 800-472-0391 will work as well. Take a pencil or pen and write down the numbers you use to find your forecast, and you can just punch those in the next time around. On Facebook, you've probably seen information about the snow today in southeastern Alaska. This morning, some places had up to a foot already. A lot of that snow is winding down, and we'll talk about that situation in a moment. You've also seen an image I'll share with you about the resuspension of ash coming off the Katmai Nova Rupta volcano area around Kodiak Island and just to the west of that. You can find information all day long on Twitter, of course, using the hashtag AKwx, that's short for Alaska Weather. And when you use that, even if you're not a follower of NWS Alaska, Fairbanks, Anchorage, or Juneau on the Twitter accounts, you can include a whole lot of other people, even people around the world, and let them know that you're talking about Alaska weather. It works really well. And again, that hashtag is AKwx. On YouTube in the afternoon, of course, you get your daily afternoon map briefing. I love to talk about this because it's a sneak peek of Alaska weather before we get into Alaska weather time each night, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. NWS Alaska is a place to find that, as well as NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks. And then after this show, you can get the complete show, what you're watching right now, AKwx TV on YouTube. That is courtesy of our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public. Now, what's going on in your part of Alaska tonight as far as watches, warnings, and advisories? Everything that we're talking about in southeastern Alaska has expired at this point. The heavier snowfall will be winding down through the remainder of the evening, assuming that's still going on north of Skagway and Haines. But as I looked at it just a little while ago, temperatures were warming up and rain was moving into those regions. So the heavier snowfall should be winding down quickly if it's not done already. So what's going on out here across the Seward Peninsula? Breezes and cold temperatures. You put that together, that's a wind chill advisory. If it's blowing strong enough, and it looks like winds will be on the order of 15 to 25 miles per hour at their strongest. And with that, it could make it feel like 45 below for a time. That'll continue into tonight and early tomorrow morning. So a wind chill advisory for the interior of the Seward Peninsula as we go into the nighttime hours. Now, once again, if you've been watching Facebook or Twitter, you may have seen this picture earlier today. This is the VIIRS false color imagery. This is a satellite that's kind of tweaked out just a little bit, and we tuned the sensor just a little bit there to kind of bring out different parts of the image that's being looked at from outer space. And if you look very carefully, there's a very thin band here. I probably should have zoomed in on this just a little bit more. This very faint finger of cloud-like image right there is actually the ash blowing off of Nova Rupta. We've seen this many, many times. It's not something that's horribly uncommon in wintertime, but it's a lot more common in a year like this where there's a lot less snow. You see all this brown here across the western Kenai Peninsula up through the Anchorage Bowl into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. You don't really get back into the snow and that lack of brown color until you get a little bit further up the Susitna Valley. You can also see a lot of many wonderful things with this. If we had Eric Stevens on, I'd just kind of let him do the rest of the show from this point. He could talk for the rest of the show, probably on this one image, I'm sure, but I'm going to do my best. Out across the west, you see kind of the bluer, greenish shades here. That's all sea ice. The pinker shades and certainly clouds. And you can see those cloud streets streaking out of Cook Inlet and blowing off of Kodiak Island and then just south and west of Castle Cape all the way down the Alaska Peninsula. This was yesterday, and you could see the clouds working northward. I'll turn the other way so we don't ignore southeastern Alaska. Here's that low pressure system as that was working northward. Yakutat right about here, so it wasn't snowing on you yet. That certainly changed as the day went on and the clouds moved northward, and that warm and wet air covered your area up across the northern Gulf, Prince William Sound, all clear there. Of course, there's Denali. So one big thing that you can certainly pick out again, just like what we were talking about yesterday with the snow across the region, this is why the historic Iditarod Trail was kind of a no-go this year. Just not a whole lot of snow. All these brown areas, again, are fairly low snow, if not no snow regions across west and southwest Alaska, certainly south central. And then the reason we're talking about this today, again, is those stronger northwesterly winds resuspending the ash off of the Nova Rupta Dome area and from the famous Katmai explosion, or eruption, I should say, from 1912. We can still have impacts from that most powerful eruption there of the 20th century. So amazing stuff, and that's just one satellite picture. I got a lot more where that's coming from. Well, let's look out west. You can see low pressure working up out of the North Pacific here. Pretty tight spiral there. That's pretty to look at too. This is working northward across the western Aleutians, and as that spreads that moisture across the western Bering Sea, we're going to see this kind of fall back into the ridge of high pressure that's controlling just the very slim area of the central Bering. So a lot of this is going to kind of drop back south and move into the North Pacific and eventually the Gulf of Alaska heading toward the end of the week. In the meantime, it's that cold northeast flow working off the continent and then bending back around, the cold working across the Alaska Peninsula here, grabbing that ash that's not covered up by snow for areas just west of Shelikof Strait. All that moving that cold air right around Bristol Bay. So we've got a lot of cold moving out of the north and warmer air that's trying to nudge that flow a little bit further east. Right now the wind's fairly light across the central and western chain. What about the rest of Alaska? Well, most of what you see here is just cold ground. A lot of cold air situated across the lower and middle Yukon Valley, very dry air, and you can see the impacts of the jet stream. We'll see that here in just a few minutes when we get into the aviation charts. That very strong southwesterly flow simply cutting a line in the cloud cover right over the eastern part of the interior, the Copper River Basin, Yukon, British Columbia, and pushing that surface storm further and further north. That's also allowing warmer air to move back into southeastern Alaska. So we're dealing with a lot more warm clouds and rainfall across central and southern parts of the Panhandle. Severe clear across most of south central today, but certainly cold. And then what we're dealing with the grayer colors you see across most of west and north and southwest Alaska is simply the satellite saying there's a lot of cold air there. It must be clouds, and indeed in this case it is not. So one more time on the satellite loop, there goes the low pressure system into southern Yukon. Another wave of clouds moving eastward. There will probably be some snow showers or rain mixed with snow showers across the region. Most of what we're seeing across southwest and south central, especially over Kodiak Island and just to your west, is just fair weather clouds with a few embedded snow showers. One caveat though, a very, very small area being affected by winds blowing right into areas south of Kachemak Bay. This is just south of Homer, of course, and if you're there, it's probably snowing. It's probably going to snow another 2 to 4 inches or so as well into the nighttime hours. It's a very localized effect, and when you look at a map like this, you really lose that scale about how much Alaska is different from one corner to the next, around the bay and into the next pass from the next. It makes a huge difference, and in this case, the forecasters are saying that this small, tiny area right here on the very southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula probably going to see some very localized but noticeable snow amounts through the rest of the evening. Now, on the bigger side of things, low pressure is working into the southern Yukon at 984 millibars. A lot of the snow is ending from south to north, and we'll continue to see that play out as we go through the night. There might be some areas that pick up a little bit of freezing rain. Most of that, again, will just become plain old liquid rain as we go into the nighttime hours. Dry conditions across the interior, high pressure extending a ridge all the way into areas north of Kotzebue Sound and eastern Siberia with that stable air across the north and pretty cold as well. Dead Horse today made it down to about 42 below. This is one of the coldest spots in the state, probably North America as well. Out across the west, frontal boundary working across the western Bering will continue moving east, but notice it's jogging southward as well, bringing rain and snow to the central chain. Spotty showers there across the eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula, more likely to be snow in that region. A weak front, maybe even just a trough sitting right across Prince William Sound will continue to encourage that colder flow down across Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait, and probably more of that ash will be flowing off of the Katmai eruption site as we get into tonight and tomorrow. As we look ahead into Friday, it's the end of the week, but not the end of the snow for the Yukon and the eastern interior. In fact, some areas in the Copper River Basin will be looking at additional but relatively light snowfall possibilities there. And the circulation may kind of lose its signature on the satellite picture. We'll have to see how strong that is. But chances are some of this moisture is going to sit and hover around the northern parts of the Gulf as we get into Friday and Saturday. A front across southeastern Alaska seems to stall. That should also seem to stall the warmer air across most areas there. So most areas probably looking at a better chance for rain than anything else, but it may mix at times in the north. Out across the west, the front continues to drop south and east, moving through the eastern chain and into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And the False Pass and Cold Bay will likely see some more snow. And then by Saturday, low pressures now into the North Pacific at 971 millibars. It can't go just due east because of the ridge that's entrenched across the northern plains and also across the western Seward Peninsula at about 1,016 millibars. So that very stable area there will stay in place, so the low pressure goes underneath that and works its way into the western Gulf. That means a return of southerly winds back to Kodiak Island, the southern coastal areas of the Alaska Peninsula. And we'll see what happens as we get into Sunday and Monday if we get more of a southerly flow back into south central and Prince William Sound. And eventually that's going to mean another surge of moisture moving toward southeastern Alaska, especially with the orientation of the jet stream. Temps today, 30s, 40s, and even a few 50s as you get into the southern parts of southeast. Looks like Haida Gwaii at 3 o'clock was holding on to temps at or above 50. Mid to upper 40s for Ketchikan and Annette, Craig and Klawock. Sitka was at 44. Even Haines and Skagway were warming up, though, still sitting in the 20s and 30s by late afternoon. Teens and 20s for Prince William Sound. Mild day, let's say, in Montague Island, but it's been a lot warmer. 13 in Kenai, 21 in Homer. And again, in this area, we're still looking at some pretty localized but appreciable snowfall there through the night. 11 around Matanuska Valley, 12 in Talkeetna, 10 below in Fairbanks. And here comes the cold as we get into the north. Fort Yukon was only 2 below, but you get up to AKwx Pass, it was 20 below. The Arctic coast, anywhere from 25 to 35 below. And again, Dead Horse dropped to 42 below overnight. Temps were running from 10 to about 15 below around the Kotzebue Sound region. Kivalina 16 below, Kotzebue 13 below. Tin City was 15 below. Nome not quite as bad, 6 below there. Unalakleet was 9 below. Galena was showing 5 below. McGrath was 1 above. Tanana was 5 below. And as you look further south toward Grayling, temperatures there also from 5 to 10 below, all the way out toward Bethel, Nunivak Island right at 0. The Pribilofs were showing temps in the lower 20s. Most of the peninsula and Bristol Bay in the single digits, teens and 20s there. Sandpoint was 21. Unalaska and Dutch Harbor showing 30 degrees, and the central and western chain at or above freezing during the day. Low temperatures tonight will continue to be winter-like cold for most of the interior and the west coast, from 15 to 30 below in most areas. Fairbanks at 27 below, Nome 18 below. Barrow and Wainwright anywhere from 30 to 35 below, and almost 40 below again around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. So mighty cold in the Great Land. Around Bristol Bay, 5 to 10 below. Kodiak Island, 12 above. 30s and 40s for southeast. Enjoy that. South Central looking at temps from 5 to about 15 below, with the exceptions of Homer and Seward. And Prince William Sound in the teens, it looks like. Kodiak 12 again, and above freezing for most of the central and western chain Pribilofs, around 22 up to 31 by the afternoon tomorrow. From 5 to 10 below in the interior, the Arctic coast 20 to 25 below, Nome 1 below, Galena at 4 below, Tanana looking at temperatures slightly above 0, southwest in the lower teens, the Alaska Peninsula, teens and 20s there, Kodiak 23, southeast in the 40s to almost 50 degrees again out toward the Dixon entrance and the outer coast, and teens and 20s for Prince William Sound. On to flying weather now. IFR continues around southeast, but you'll notice it's breaking up a little bit since that low pressure system's moved ashore. For the interior, VFR for most areas. One exception will be some very isolated IFR conditions inside of Kotzebue Sound, probably just ashore, and around the north slope. Watch for areas of IFR to develop through the afternoon. And across the west ahead of the front, IFR conditions there, and MVFR for a broad area in the Gulf, as well as the windward side of the Alaska Peninsula with those northwest winds. Here's your pass conditions. We expect IFR in the morning for AKwx and Adigan Pass, probably trending toward MVFR conditions as the day goes on. As we get into Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, things look pretty good throughout the rest of your Friday. For Rainy Pass and Windy Pass, things look okay there. Isabel Pass, probably heading for MVFR conditions throughout the day. As we get into Mentasta Pass, expect IFR to develop during your afternoon. And for Tanita Pass as well as Portage Pass, we're going to call VFR for Friday flying. Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions at least through the morning hours. There may be some improvement during the day as far as low pressure continues to move northward and warm things up just a little bit more. Now, freezing levels show the entrenched cold dropping southward into the northern Gulf. As far as the elevated freezing levels go, 2, 4, even 6,000 feet across southeastern Alaska, with that warmer air trailing low pressure as it moves into southern sections of Yukon. There's also warmer air just south of the Aleutians, but that doesn't seem to play a major role in how the forecast goes for the next several days. Icing potential out across the west is generally limited to the Pribilofs and areas just south of the chain. Most of that will be above 5,000 feet. A little bit south of the Panhandle, above 6,000 feet, you might run into some light to isolated moderate. Most of what we're talking about for the mainland looks to be pretty minor, so we won't mention that tonight. Tomorrow's jet stream shows that trough of low pressure across the mainland. And remember that cloud line that we were kind of looking at on the satellite picture? That's associated with the south and westerly moving flow. All the moisture coming out of the Pacific is limited to areas east of this and west of this ridge. It's happening right in here. So pretty amazing stuff. You can actually see how the weather is making the weather across the region with the jet stream flow like this. The westerly flow coming in pretty strong just south of the chain, anywhere from 50 knots closer to the islands, and just south of that, considerably stronger at 160 knots. Below the driving force of the weather at 30,000 feet, we have the 9,000-foot winds, and the circulation's just across the northern tip of the Cook Inlet there. That's driving northerlies down the west coast, south and westerly flow into the north and eastern Gulf. Around central and southern parts of the Panhandle, 40 and 50-knot winds are coming ashore there. Winds are picking up a little bit more across the eastern Brooks Range, between 20 and 30 knots. Northeasterlies coming into the North Slope, and more of a west and southwesterly flow for the central and western chain, running between about 30 and 40 knots. Low pressure across the western Bering Sea, also showing winds coming in from the north and west, 20 to 30 knots there. Northerly flow coming down the west coast, 15 to 30 knots, crossing Kodiak Island between 20 and 35 knots. And southeast, looking at winds from the west and southwest, 20 to 25 knots. And once again, a little bit of a stronger flow crossing the Alaska Range at 25 to 35 knots. So turbulence is probably more of an issue than icing will be. You'll notice light to isolated moderate across the Bering. A little bit stronger possibilities there for the southern tip of the peninsula as well as the eastern chain below 4,000 feet. Around Kodiak Island, Cook Inlet, and Shelikof Strait, watch for some chop. Some of that could reach occasional moderate. And across Dixon Entrance and probably southward toward Haida Gwaii, below 4,000 feet, you'll have a little bit of a shake on the yoke as you go through the day. Let's look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back with an update on the sea ice edge and your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Go find some dark. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. Next week, you may be able to see the false dusk of Omar Khayyam because the moon will be out of the night sky and out of the way.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're also going to show you how you can use that out-of-the-way moon to find some planets. Let's get started.
We're facing west after it gets dark next week. You must have a dark sky, free of city lights, to see the false dusk. A good test for your sky is whether you can see the Milky Way. It will start at the horizon in the northwest, pass high overhead, and then drop down and hit the horizon again in the southeast.
If you can't see the Milky Way, assuming it's clear and cloud-free, my suggestion is to get in your car and go find some dark. You may have to drive a good distance, but believe me, it will be worth it.
Many people don't know what a good dark sky looks like because they've never seen one. Most people in the U.S. live in a fairly urbanized, that is, well-lit area. Let's take a quick look at a satellite view of North America at night.
Wow, it's hard to believe that there's that much wasted light being sprayed out into the sky.
Yeah, just think of how many power plants it takes to produce that much wasted light. It isn't doing anybody any good on the ground.
Let's say you can see the Milky Way. Then just take your time and let your eyes get used to the dark. Turn off the flashlights, the headlights, the phone screens, and just soak up some dark. It can take up to an hour for your eyes to get really dark adapted.
And just a brief burst of light can undo all the dark adaptation you've spent so much time trying to achieve.
So keep it dark.
Facing west, after it gets dark, you may see a rather rare sky phenomenon, starting at the horizon and extending about halfway up in the sky. Look for a faint, rounded pyramid of light. Higher in the west, you should see a fuzzy cluster of stars, the Pleiades. The false dusk doesn't reach as high as the Pleiades, so concentrate your search below the Pleiades.
It's also called the zodiacal light, and what you're seeing is sunlight reflecting off the tiny dust particles that lie in the plane of the orbits of the planets. It is visible every night throughout the year from a really dark location, but in the spring and the fall, it's at its best.
Because then it's straight up from the horizon. During summer and winter, the zodiacal light lies at an angle and doesn't reach so high. Now, a few of you might not want to drive for several hours to find a dark sky.
I can't imagine.
So let's focus on things we can see from the city.
Like the planets and the moon.
Next week gives us the opportunity to use the moon to help us find a pair of planets after sunset.
Okay, planet number 1 is Venus. It'll be shining brightly in the west after sunset when you go out to look for the false dusk. In fact, Venus will help in your search because Venus will lie right in the middle of the zodiacal light.
And the red planet Mars lies not far below Venus.
About 10 degrees. And Mars will set about an hour before Venus, so it might not be as easy to find.
But next week, the moon will come to the rescue. On March 21st, look low in the west after sunset for a skinny 2-day-old moon. Then about 3 fingers to the right of the moon, and bingo, there's Mars.
The following night, March 22nd, a slightly older, fatter, and brighter moon will be just to the left of Venus.
And this will probably be the end of your window to see the zodiacal light, because the light of the moon is enough to overwhelm it.
So look for the false dusk over the next week or so.
Low in the west, after the sky gets dark, Venus will show you the way as you keep looking up.
A quick check of today's sea ice edge shows sea ice is still expanding to the south and east, closer to the Alaska Peninsula and also closer to the Pribilofs now. Out across the west, we still have a westerly and southerly flow coming in, but this colder flow is encouraging the ice to grow, and we'll continue to watch that as we go into the weekend. You can do the same at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. Here's a look at the Friday forecast for southeastern Alaska. More of an onshore flow for the outer coast. The inner coast looking at a south and southeasterly flow. 35 knots seems to be the strongest we see. On the inside around Clarence Strait, 7 to 10 foot seas are expected closer to the ocean entrances. An onshore flow around Yakutat and into Cross Sound at 25 knots with a 12 to 13 foot sea there. Really not a lot of change on the outer coast as we go through Saturday. 20 to 25 knots in all areas, 11 to 13 foot seas there. Southerly flow into the Lynn Canal at 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. We get northwesterlies back in the Clarence Strait though at 20 knots with a 4 foot sea there for Saturday afternoon. For south central, relatively light winds across Cook Inlet there, also encouraging that ice to grow, but a considerably stronger flow blowing through the Barren Islands from 40 to 45 knots from the north and west. 14 foot seas there, freezing spray and higher gusts should be planned for. 30 to 40 knots across Kodiak Island, 10 foot seas there in Shelikof Strait, 12 foot seas on the east side around Marmot Bay. And northwesterlies inside of Prince William Sound with a 4 foot sea. Higher gusts also around the Copper River Basin, and we'll keep that northwesterly flow across the western Gulf. It changes a little bit as we get into Saturday there. More of a westerly flow outside of Prince William Sound. Light northeasterlies inside the Sound. Northeasterly winds also develop on the lee of Kodiak Island, and we get a northeasterly flow coming down Cook Inlet from 10 to about 25 knots. So that stronger flow across the Barrens kind of turns off for a little while, but there still could be some higher gusts and freezing spray in the region. Friday across the peninsula, look for a northwesterly flow inside of Bristol Bay. Again, in the ice-free areas, we're looking at 3 foot seas. Southeasterlies north of Cold Bay and the Bering Sea coast there, looking at 30 knot winds with a 5 foot sea. Northwesterlies around Castle Cape, and once again, that could encourage that ash to be resuspended again through tomorrow. A southerly flow from Perryville, Sandpoint, and into King Cove with a 6-foot sea there on Friday. That becomes northeasterly on Saturday. Southeasterly flow up toward Castle Cape with a 30-knot wind. North and easterly winds on the Bering Sea coast from 30 to 35 knots with 11-foot seas there the further down the coast you go. Around the Aleutians, a west and southwesterly flow for the central and western chain. Winds almost very light across the western areas from Kiska to Attu. A southeasterly flow north of Unalaska and stronger winds across the Pacific coast with 12 to 15-foot seas there on Friday, becoming 10 to 13-foot seas on Saturday with a reversal of the winds as that northerly flow starts to take over a little bit further out to the west and that trough of low pressure drops a little bit further south. All areas looking at 15 to about 35 knots on Saturday. For the west coast, northerly still coming down the coast from 15 to 20 knots there. 3-foot seas closer to Nunivak Island in the ice-free areas. A stronger easterly flow now for the Pribilofs with a 12-foot sea, and those 40-knot winds also reaching up to St. Matthew with a 17-foot sea there. Northeasterlies blow through all areas on Saturday. Wind speeds from 15 to 25 knots in the north and up to 30 to 40 knots there a little bit further south. 14-foot seas around the Pribilofs, 13-foot seas for the St. Matthew Island area with freezing sprays south of the ice edge, of course. Light winds are still treating the northern coast, but that means the air is really cold. Look for 5 to 10 knot winds from the north and east for the Beaufort Sea coast and west and southwesterlies from Barrow westward. Now, once you get into the Kotzebue Sound region, winds are coming out of the north about 10 to 20. We'll see on Saturday that those go light as well, north and easterly winds there, but westerlies develop from Point Lay to Wainwright and Barrow, about 15 to 20 knots on Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, low pressure continues working northward into western Canada. That means more warm air and more rain for more areas in the north. That we're looking at some possibilities of heavy snow through the afternoon. That should be ending if it hasn't already. Colder, drier air for the interior, the west and southwest and south central. One exception on the southern end of Kachemak Bay. You're still looking at a 2 to 4 inch snowfall at least through tonight. A frontal boundary working through the Bering Sea will spread isolated rain and snow showers into the Aleutians as we go into the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.